I knew any of these folks.
I still meet neighbors and friends.
What's that?
I still meet neighbors.
Yeah.
So how's Barbara doing?
Or are you just all folks that know Jeff?
We know Jeff.
Welcome everybody. We are now at the 86th house concert for Story Crossroads. And it's about time that we are featuring Jeff Driggs. Now before I go into that, yes, trust me, we will definitely do a lot of applause. I want you to know that with Story Crossroads, we are actually going on our 10th Summit and Festival. So we're kind of like 10 years old, which is just beautiful. And you, if you're in person yet, we're just changing over a lot of our signage and things like that. But if you want to sneak a peek at our updated logo, you'll be able to switch this around later, and you can see this on here because there's an overlay, a lovely overlay on our stream right now, right? For some people, it's almost like a tall person right there, and you're just kind of, oh. And then we also have our year-end campaign that is kicking off November 15th to the end of the year. So obviously, since we're 501c3 and you're like, yes, I need tax deductible, then you can think of us. And for those of you online, you can always go to storycrossroads.org/donate, or even anybody. And but November 15th, we're going to be having a lot of fun. Ooh, I can't wait.
I'm coming.
Yeah, well, yeah. And then we have our continuous funders, and I just want to give a big shout out to these that have from the beginning. So that's how many years worth? How many years was it again? 10. Wait, how many? 10. So 10 years that we've been getting funding from Utah Humanities, from the Zoo, Arts and Parks of Salt Lake County, ZAP, which, by the way, was voted renewed another 10 years. So very loving that. And then the Utah Division of Arts and Museums. We have the Westerns. Well, they changed their name. I'm going to say what their real name is. I keep thinking Western, but they're Creative West now, which is a Western region of, instead of a state organization, more of a Western. So Creative West! And also a Salt Lake City Arts Council. And we also have received funding and help from the City Murray and so many people like you. So thank you so much. Yeah, I know. Wait, I didn't hear that. Huh? But we really want to delve into the fun. We are here for Jeff Driggs. Wait, what are we here for? Jeff Driggs. And not only that, it's for Tales from Sweet Home, which I find it very interesting because guess where he lives now? Sugar House. So from Sweet Home, Oregon to Sugar House, Utah, I think it was just meant to be. So very exciting for that. And for those who are on the stream, just, in the comments, do your applause and let us know that you're there. That's great. We know that you're there, especially in Oregon. And Jeff, just so you know, he is eventually going to be, he's right now the vice president, but he's eventually going to be the president of the Utah Storytelling Guild. And he's performed at Story Crossroads before, he's performed at the Clearfield Storytelling Festival, he's performed all over, and every time I hear him, just an amazing experience. So I'm excited for you to have your own experience tonight. So let's welcome to the stage, and make sure your cell phones are on silent, by the way, and let's welcome to the stage, Jeff Driggs.
I hate Brussels sprouts. Those nasty, bitter little cabbages. Now I know people will say, well, you just haven't had them prepared properly. You have to slice them and grill them and drizzle olive oil. Yeah. That's not the way my mom made Brussels sprouts in the 70s. She took her box of Western Family frozen Brussels sprouts out of the freezer, dumped them in a pot of water, and boiled all the vitamins and minerals out of them. Then she served up 5 or 6 of them on a plate with meatloaf and potatoes or whatever, and dished them up for me. And my mom was not one of those, well, you have to have at least 2 bites of everything kind of moms. No, she was a clean your plate kind of mom. A you're not getting up from that table until you finish your dinner kind of mom. A if I do let you go to bed without finishing your dinner, that's what you're having for breakfast kind of mom. Well, one summer afternoon, when I was about 12 years old or so, I decided that I wanted to make a cake for the family to enjoy after dinner that night. Now, we did not normally have dessert after every meal. Desserts were for holidays, cakes were for birthdays, and this was no special occasion. I just thought I wanted to do it, and Mom said I could. Now, I have to clarify, when I say I made a cake, I mean I got a box of cake mix and a can of prepared frosting out of the cupboard, but I mixed it up and cooked it, baked it, and it came out just fine, and I was really looking forward to having it for dinner that night. Well, as you might have guessed, that night my mom ate Brussels sprouts. And she told me that if I didn't eat my Brussels sprouts, I couldn't have any of the cake. My cake! The cake I had made! How unfair was that? Well, my family at home at that time consisted just of my dad and Mom and me. And we would eat around this little counter. It was too small to be called an island. It was a little peninsula that stuck out from the wall, just wide enough for my dad and Mom to sit side by side on the dining room side, and I sat across from them on the kitchen side, snuggled up next to the dishwasher. Now, my parents ate their meal as usual in a normal amount of time and went off to read the paper or watch the news or whatever. And I, as usual, had been dawdling through my whole meal, finishing off everything else, and then I had nothing left but those Brussels sprouts. How was I going to get those down? So I sat and I thought, Lowry's seasoned salt. I like Lowry's seasoned salt. Lowry's seasoned salt makes everything taste better. So I got out the salt, and I sprinkled it all over those Brussels sprouts. And I speared one, and I took a little nibble of it. Lowry's seasoned salt makes everything taste better, except Brussels sprouts. So I sat, and I thought some more. And then I remembered that Mom sometimes served us cucumber slices and soaking in a little bowl of vinegar. And I liked those. So I got out the vinegar and I poured it all over those Brussels sprouts, and I took another little nibble. No, those little balls of death were just as bad as ever. So I sat and I thought some more. And then I remembered that in the refrigerator was the half-used can of Betty Crocker ready to spread chocolate frosting left over from the cake. So I got out that can, and I got a big spoon, and I took a big scoop, and I took no more nibbling now. I took one of those salted, vinegar-soaked Brussels sprouts, and I popped it into my mouth and followed over with a big spoonful of chocolate frosting. And I was able to get down each one of them that way. And to this day, that is the taste in my mouth when I think Brussels sprouts. Thank you very much. And thank you all for coming out tonight or for tuning in. It's a pleasure to have you, to see you all. As you know, the story, the The title for tonight is Tales from Sweet Home, and all the stories I'm going to be telling, including that one, are true stories that happened in and around my hometown of Sweet Home, Oregon. But before I go on, I do have one little postscript, a Utah postscript to that story. One of my sons is here tonight, Court, and his wife, Whitley. Thank you. But my other son, Chandler, I wasn't forgetting his name, I was forgetting what I was going to say. Anyway, well, my boys were raised, because of this experience I had, they were raised not eating Brussels sprouts. We did not serve them in our home. And one time, my other daughter-in-law, Carson, told her husband, my son Chandler, that she wanted to make Brussels sprouts. And he was very leery of this, having heard my story, but being the good, supportive husband he is, he said, okay. So on the day in question, she made the Brussels sprouts, and she had them sitting in a little bowl on the counter. And when Chandler came home from work, she was on the phone, and he came in, he saw the Brussels sprouts, and his curiosity took over. He could not wait for dinner. He had to see if what Dad had always said was right. So he took a Brussels sprout and he popped it in his mouth and immediately regretted it. It was like burning and acidic taste. He tried to chew it. He couldn't handle it. He spit it out. His wife got off the phone and said, "What is the matter?" He said, "That was terrible. It tasted like chemicals." And she said, "What are you talking about?" And at that point, their 4-year-old daughter, my granddaughter Peyton, said, "Well, I thought they looked dirty, so I sprayed some cleaner on them." True story, also. All right, so Sweet Home, Oregon. It's a beautiful little logging community in Oregon's Willamette Valley, about 50 miles southeast of Salem. I say it's a logging community because most of the industry there had to do with logging. There were lumberjacks and mill workers and log truck drivers, or people who worked for the Forest Service. Another major industry there was recreation. Sweet Home is kind of on the banks of two large reservoirs created by Foster Dam and Green Peter Dam. So there was a lot of boating and water skiing and fishing, and up in the mountains around there's camping and hunting and rock hounding and things like that. So Sweet Home, like a lot of little cities, has an annual festival, and they called it Sportsman's Holiday because of this recreation. So how small was Sweet Home? Well, I'll tell you. Of course, there was a Sportsman's Holiday parade. And you all know how important convertibles are in a parade to drive around the royalty and the officials. So for a couple of years, my parents owned a convertible. And one year, my mother drove the Grand Marshal of the festival at the head of the parade in our convertible. When she got to the end of the parade route, she turned the corner and came racing back down the parallel street back to the staging area of the parade, where they ripped off all the posters, stuck new ones on, and my dad drove another group of people in the same car at the end of the same parade. So, my parents are not originally from Sweet Home, and neither was I. So let me tell you how we got there. My dad's name was Donald. He was born in Oregon, and except for the 4 years he served our country during World War II, he lived in Oregon his whole life. He, before he graduated from high school, he got a job as a messenger boy for First National Bank of Oregon. And other than the 4 years he served our country during World War II, he worked for First National Bank for his entire career, 43 years. And he got various promotions along the way and transfers around the state, from Salem to Staten to Coos Bay up to a branch in Portland. We're going to leave him there for a second. My mother's name was Texas. That was her actual name on her birth certificate, given to her by her parents because, of course, she was born in Massachusetts. Yes. Don't ask. Literally, don't ask. Mom hated being asked. She would just say, "Oh, my parents had a sense of So she grew up outside of Boston, and just as she was graduating from high school, her boyfriend's family all decided that they were going, the father, I guess, decided they were going to move to Oregon. Excuse me. So mom packed up after she graduated. She moved out to Oregon. She married her boyfriend, and they ultimately had my two older brothers, Steve and Dan. Steve and Dan, they're right here. That marriage did not last, and after a few years, mom found herself now as a single mother needing to get a job, and she ended up getting a job in a Portland branch of First National Bank. And you can do the math. So they were married. After a few years, they moved. Dad was transferred to Salem, where family legend has it I was born, but more on that later. Then we moved to Kaiser, a suburb of Salem, and then when I was 10 years old, Dad was transferred, his final transfer, to become the manager of the Sweet Home branch of First National Bank of Oregon. And that's where my next story is going to pick up. I started in 3rd grade there. Nothing much happened for a couple of years until 6th grade. Mrs. Morris was a terrible teacher. Now, it was her first year of teaching right out of college, so we probably should have cut her a little slack, but we were used to quality education at Oak Heights Grade School. You may think that our problem was that she was too strict, but that's not the case at all. We'd had strict teachers before. Miss Fawn, our 3rd grade teacher, she was tough. She ruled her classroom with an iron fist. She knew the teacher's job was to lead and the student's job was to obey, and we were fine with that. But if anything, Mrs. Morris was too lenient. She came with these crazy ideas about 6th graders being accountable for their own actions and responsible for their own decisions, and that didn't set well with Mary Beth Markham and me. I mean, sure, we were mature, responsible students, but some of our classmates, like Jamie Dirt, well, I'll tell you about him in a minute. But for example, Mrs. Morris said that we could sit wherever we wanted in the classroom. So I took a seat right up front where I could keep an eye on her. That was where most of my other teachers had me sit anyway. She also said we could decorate our desks however we wanted. So I took a picture of an old pen pal of mine, and I stuck it to the front of my desk, and I told everyone he was my cousin, Robinson Brockmeyer Jr. I said his father was a powerful California politician, and his mother was a bigwig in the Hollywood industry, and she was going to get me into the movies. Now, if I'm telling you about Robinson Brockmeyer Jr., I really need to tell you about Chauncey Dudley III, because that was me. I had determined that Mr. and Mrs. Driggs were not really my parents. And I knew that because they were so mean to me. They made me clean my room. I had to take out the garbage. They wouldn't let me stay up late to watch Night Gallery. One time, my mom even made me weed the garden in the hot summer sun, if you can imagine that. So I determined that I was really Chauncey Dudley III. That my real parents were millionaires in Chicago, where I had a twin sister named Caroline. And the Driggses, when I was a baby, had come and kidnapped me and were raising me as their own so they could somehow get their hands on my inheritance someday. I'm not sure if Mrs. Morris bought that, but that's what I explained to people. Another way that Mrs. Morris was so lenient was we had these extra desks at the back of the classroom, more desks than students. Now, Mary Beth Markham and I were big readers. We read Hardy Boys, Nancy Drew, the Happy Hollisters. Does anyone here know the Happy Hollisters? I haven't found anybody who does. They were a great series of books about little kid detectives. And so we knew we were great detectives. And the summer before, I had read a lot of Perry Mason books, so I could be an attorney, too. So Mrs. Morris let us take these desks in the back of the classroom, and we put signs on them. There was the Markham Detective Agency, the Driggs Law Firm, and in the middle was Problem Solvers Incorporated. We would sit there during lunch hour or maybe a rainy recess or whatever, and people could come and sit down with problem solvers. That was the only one that ever got any business. They would tell us their problems. And for a nickel, we would give them advice. Think of Lucy Van Pelt and Peanuts, you know. In fact, Mrs. Morris herself once came and sat down to ask me advice. See, her husband, Mr. Morris, was the other 6th grade teacher. And she said that he had a student who was a real troublemaker in his classroom. It was a girl who, like, her head was in the clouds, kind of like a Pippi Longstocking, Anne of Green Gables type, always making up tall tales and fanciful stories, and a real troublemaker in class. You know what I mean? So I told Mrs. Morris that she should tell Mr. Morris that Mrs. Morris had a student like that and asked this girl for advice, because I knew that would make her think. And she would realize that she was actually the problem. And you know, it made me think too. And I realized that some students can be so clueless. I just don't understand. Another problem with Mrs. Morris were the silly rules she had. We could stand, for example, we could stand anywhere in the classroom and throw a piece of trash at the waste paper basket. If we made it, fine. If we didn't, she'd write our name on the board. And if they missed again, or if we misbehaved in some other way, she'd start making tally marks on the board next to our name. And if we got so many demerits in a day, she'd give us some punishment. I don't remember what the punishment was because the class started behaving better anyway around that time. But the point is, they were just silly rules. Like she was rewarding us for good aim or good behavior or something. I don't know. But the worst thing about Mrs. Morris was that she was so wishy-washy. If two students had some disagreement, they came up to her to settle it, she refused to take sides. It's like she couldn't make up her mind because she was so wishy-washy, and she made them work it out on their own. Like Jamie Derby and me. So Jamie Derby was a bully. He used to trip me in the hallway, knock shoulders against me, threatened to beat me up after school. Well, one day he came and sat down at Problem Solvers Incorporated. "What's your problem?" I said. "Guess," he said. "Me?" I said. "Yep," he said. Jamie just had a problem with my personality, my style and creativity, I guess. But we talked it through and we came to an agreement. I agreed to be less of a dweeb and he agreed not to beat me up. And I got a nickel out of him. But it was no thanks to Mrs. Morris. She hadn't helped at all because she was so wishy-washy. And Mary Beth and I weren't going to take that any longer. We decided that we were going to write her a sternly written letter that would get her quaking in her boots. So one night I went home, got out my mom's typewriter, and I typed up a letter to Mrs. Morris. I said I was from the parents' committee of the school district. And we had found out about her silly rules and how wishy-washy she was, and that she needed to straighten up and fly right. This is the best part. I signed it Sterling Atherton IV, because I knew that was a powerful name that would catch her attention. Now, I had decided that if I got caught doing this, I was going to be a gentleman and not admit Mary Beth had anything to do with it. So the next day at school, when the class went out to recess, I slipped the letter on her desk. And then when we came in, I sat there and watched as Mrs. Morris went up to her desk, picked up the letter, read through it, looked up and said, "Jeff, let's go out in the hall." As soon as we walked out in the hallway, I said, "Mary Beth did it too." Well, we talked through my concerns there for a few minutes, and then she sent me down to the principal's office so I could talk through my concerns with him too. You know, the funny thing is that after that, things went along really well with Mrs. Morris and me. We got along just fine. In fact, you could say by the end of the school year, we were even friends. In fact, the next year, when they would pass me in the mornings when I was standing in the rain waiting for the bus, she and her husband would stop and give me a ride to the junior high. Yeah, Mrs. Morris had been a terrible teacher, but I made her a better one. If you could sense some kind of imagination from 12-year-old me in that story, I have to give credit to that to my mother. My mother was a very imaginative person, and I would say she was a very honest person. Honest as the day is long. The story is about Abraham Lincoln walking 5 miles to return a penny that he overcharged the customer. That could apply to my mom. Mom would never lie to get gain or to get advantage over somebody. But she did like to come up with white lies, I will call them. The first one, I will say, has to do with my scar. Now, the people in the front row can probably see the scar on the side of my mouth. For all I know, the people in the back row and the people online can see it. I don't know how obvious it is. It kind of reminds me of the poem by Anthony Ewer, "As a beauty, I am not a star. There are others far handsomer by far. But my face, I don't mind it, for I am behind it. It's the ones out in front that I jar." The true story is I was born with my mouth open to here. And just lips, it wasn't a gaping wound or anything. And when I was 1 or 2, it was sewed up to where it is, so it's left a scar. Now, I don't think about this most of the time because the adults I associate with, like most of you, have never asked me about it, never commented about it. The kids are not like that. They will ask. And one time I told my mom that kids always ask me about it, and she said that I should tell them it was a dueling scar. I had no idea what a dueling scar was, but the point is neither did they. So that ended the conversation. I didn't have to come up with the answers for any reasonable follow-up questions like, why would a 4-year-old be in a sword fight for honor or something? But the other thing is, and I'm sure you will all attest, that I have lovely, perfectly rounded shaped ears. See, nothing wrong with them at all. And I don't think there ever was anything at all. But when I was a kid, I don't know, maybe they stuck out a little bit more, but they didn't make fun of me for my ears straight. If you looked at me straight on, apparently, they said my ears were pointy. So, again, I talked to my mom about it, and Mom says, tell them that Spock is your uncle. So that's what I said. Now this, they did have follow-up questions on. So I had to determine, well, if he was my uncle, then he must be my mother's brother, because Leonard Nimoy has a different last name than me. And yes, those are his real ears. I do put makeup on him and all that. So my mom was preparing me to be a storyteller. One of the best stories was the Mark Twain Motel. When I was a kid, we went on a vacation, and I think it was in Nevada. We stayed at the Mark Twain Motel. And when we got home and unpacked, we found out that we had accidentally stolen a towel from the Mark Twain Motel. It was marked clearly on an MTM. And I'm sure my parents called them and paid for it or whatever, but Mom was very embarrassed about this. And we did keep it, and it just went into our regular towel rotation, but we were not to take it out in public at the swimming pool or anything. But if we ever did, and anyone asked, we should tell them that it stood for Mary Tyler Moore. Why we had Mary Tyler Moore's monogram towel was never explained, but that was what my mom came up with. Now, the last lie that I'll tell you wasn't a lie of words, but more of actions. Mom was a smoker, and she was also a reader. She loved reading detective novels, and she admired the detectives like Hercule Poirot and Miss Marple and Sherlock Holmes, and how smart they were, and how if they found a single clue, they could extrapolate that from that and find the culprit. Well, Mom, a very honest person who would never intentionally commit a crime, determined that if she ever did want to commit a crime that required her to maybe case the joint for a few hours, during which time she was sure she would be smoking, and if she happened to use up all the matches in her matchbook and drop it on the ground, if all of those things, for that reason and that reason only, my right-handed mother taught herself to light her matches left-handed so she could throw off the police. That is the mindset of my mother, and one of the legacies she left me. Now, one other legacy I want to tell you that I got from my parents, and they were, I had determined, my actual parents, Donald and Texas, were. So let me tell you about them. My dad was a high school basketball star. And my mom also was the star of her girls' basketball team. And she played tennis in high school as well. When they were older, they both played golf and went bowling, and they were very good at it. Our house was filled with trophies that they had received over the years. So together, their athletic genes led to me and my innate ability to miss, drop, or be hit by any football, basketball, baseball, ping pong ball, or hockey puck sent hurtling in my direction. When I was in 6th grade, I went out for the boys' basketball team and was put on the 5th grade team. I only remember playing in one game before they promoted me to team manager. But I can just imagine my very supportive father, as he sat up in the stands, must have been dying inside watching me out on that basketball court. In 8th grade, I went out for cross country, and I was put on the 7th grade cross country team. My poor dad, standing at the finish line, waiting interminably for me to come, must have just hated it. But I had 2 goals for myself that year. One was that I would never be the last person to finish a race, and I achieved that. I was always the last person on our team, but there was always some poor schlub on another team that came in later. My second goal was that by the end of that year, I, the worst runner on the boys' team, would finally get a time better than Edith Agon, the worst runner on the girls' team. And at the final meet, I did achieve that goal. So at that point, I knew athletics were not for me. But I had one more challenge ahead of me as I went into high school. Backwards Bear Walks Barone. Now, I believe that there are PE teachers out there who are kind and patient and loving to students who are less academically or athletically inclined. Mr. Barone was not one of those teachers. He was one of the JV football coaches, and I'm sure out on the football field he was tough to his football players. But in class, they were the apples of his eye. He got the name Backwards Bear Walk Barone because of the punishment he liked to mete out to any of the boys who didn't run fast enough, or didn't do enough push-ups, or didn't climb the rope high enough. Now, a backwards bear walk, well, a bear walk is like you would imagine. You're on your hands and your feet, not your knees, and you're lumbering along like a bear. Not too difficult, but backwards bear walks is to do that walking backwards, and it's very uncoordinated and uncomfortable and frankly painful. Try it sometime. I'll go home and do that tonight. Now imagine doing that all the way to the end of a high school gym and all the way back as your classmates are waiting and watching and hooting and jeering. Notice I said jeering, not cheering. I was not a fan of Mr. Barone, but I will give him credit for coming up with the one athletic competition at which I honestly did excel. And I'm going to call it, I don't know if he had a name for it, I'm calling it the Barone Brigade. He would take the boys' PE class up to the wrestling room where the entire floor was covered with wrestling mats. He'd divide the class in half. Half would be on their hands and knees against one wall, and the other half against the opposite wall, and he would blow his whistle, and the two brigades would advance towards each other on hands and knees, with the sole goal of getting one player from your team to touch the opposite wall. Which meant, of course, some people were trying to get through to the opposite wall, and others were trying to play defense or trying to stop the other team. For some reason, maybe because I was so small, or I was wiry, or I wasn't any kind of athletic threat to anybody, I was always the one who made it through and touched the opposite wall. I was honestly the star of that game. My team never lost. There's one more reason I might have done so well. I was motivated. Because after each match, Mr. Barone would divide us up, pair us up, with one of the boys on the losing team on his back down on the mat, and one of the boys from the winning team kneeling over him, and he would blow his whistle, and for 3 long seconds, the winners got to beat up on the losers. I swear I'm not making that up. At the end of class, he would have us march past, and he'd sprayed our red road rash knees with a disinfectant, not that, what do you call it, antiseptic. The one humanitarian thing the man would do. Well, apparently word made it back from parents to the administrators, because after a couple of days, we didn't play Barone Brigade anymore. And better yet, at the end of the school year, his contract was not renewed. Now, I like to believe that, I'm sure he went on and secured other teaching posts elsewhere, but I like to believe that Mr. Barone learned his lesson and never again had students play this competition, because that would mean that I remain, to this day, the undisputed, undefeated world champion of Barone Brigade. Thank you very much. Okay, so I've told you about my mom, about my mom's imagination and her athletic ability. Now I need to tell you about one more legacy she gave me. My mother was a wordsmith. She loved to read, as I said. We subscribed to 3 or 4 newspapers. She read them all every day. She did all the crossword puzzles. She loved doing crossword puzzles. She annotated her dictionaries. Dictionary, one big volume. And she wrote poetry. Now, not the moon, June, swoon romantic stuff. My mom liked to write limericks and funny little ditties, especially commemorating the important events in the lives of her friends and family. But the events she chose to commemorate were a little odd. For example, when her mother was diagnosed with varicose veins, Mom wrote this. Now, to fully appreciate the rhyme scheme, you have to remember that my mom and her mother were both native Bostonians, okay? There once was a lady named Irma who was troubled with veins in her derma. The doctor said rest, and he'd do his best to make her legs better and firmer. And then she wrote at the end, and did Irma murmur? Then there was the time when her next door neighbor and good friend Loretta had her wisdom teeth out. My mom made up a batch of split pea soup, and she took that over to her with this poem. To help you recoup, I've made you this soup, for I hear that you're not feeling great. Made of peas, it should ease and please your sore thumbs until... Okay, I've really messed this up. Let me try this again. To help you recoup, I made you this soup, for I hear that you're not feeling great. Made of peas, it should please and hopefully ease your sore gums till they're feeling first rate. I'm sorry. Okay. Those were the short ones. I got a couple of longer ones, you know. One of my favorites is one that she wrote to commemorate when a friend of hers from Kaiser got a facelift. And she entitled this one Reconstructivity, or Who's Fooling Who? There's a brand new face in Kaiser, and I hope I'll recognize her, for a little birdie told me all the news. Seems the lady did conspire to attain her heart's desire, and a certain kind of doctor she did choose. Her request was not so strange. Would you kindly rearrange this and that and take a tiny tuck or two? Yes, of course, the man did say. Why, I do it every day, and we soon will have you looking good as new. Hubby being far up north, the decision made henceforth. Now there wasn't any reason to delay. Came out looking like a mummy, feeling rummy, kind of crummy, settled down to let the bruises fade away. Now the operation's done and the fun has just begun. Should we notice? If we speak, will we offend? Surely she will realize we would never criticize her new disguise, for now we have an old and new friend. Now, as I said, Mom studied words, but she read a lot, did the crossword puzzle, did Scrabble. She was very proud of her vocabulary and her spelling ability, which of course is key to crossword puzzles and Scrabble. But one time she was a little too proud of it, and she got into a disagreement with a friend of hers over the spelling of a particular word. And it turned out, Mom was so sure she was right, she bet her friend $1 on how to spell this word. She was wrong. And so when she paid up the bet, she enclosed this poem, which she entitled Some Pensive Polysyllabics Pondered Upon a Pluvial Perambulation, or Never Say I Welched on a Bet. All right, I'm going to get water for this one. The spelling of collectible to me is not acceptable. It's really quite defectible and strikes me as absurd. I wish it was rejectable. It's so unintellectable for such a simple word. But Webster's dictionary proved my spelling was contrary, whereas you luminary, knew the I was right, not A. And so, as customary, as a strict precautionary way of settling monetary, this enclosure's sent your way. Yes, applaud my mother. That was really was fun. I wanted to share those poems with you because I really want cemented in your mind what a great sense of humor my mother had and how she saw the lighter things of life. And bear that in mind as I tell you my last story tonight, which I am entitling The Funny Things That Happened When My Mom Died. Now, there's your content warning. And I realize that for some of you this may be a sensitive topic, or you think that I'm insensitive to make light of that. And so I will not be offended if you want to slip out and excuse yourself. And while you do it, I'm going to, before I tell the story, I'm going to tell two of my mom's favorite jokes. One, there were 3 sisters, and these sisters, each of them had a little quirk. One sister had an itchy scalp, so she was always scratching all over it. The second sister was itchy all over her body, so she was always scratching everywhere. And the third sister always had a runny nose, so she was always wiping it on the back of her hand. Well, one day a prince came to town, as happens in such stories, looking for a wife, and he was coming to visit. And the girl's mother said, "Now, girls, you need to settle down and be good, so he will choose you as your wife." So the 3 girls were there, and they were talking with him, and finally the first girl couldn't take it anymore. And she said, "I'm going to get a new hairdo, and there's going to be a curl here, and a curl here, and a curl here." And then the second girl said, "Well, I'm going to get a new dress, and there's going to be a rose here, and a rose here, a rose here." The third sister said, See that chair over there? Belongs over there. Next story. Next story. There was a man who owned a cat, and he loved this cat with all of his heart. It was a very special cat to him. He took it everywhere. But one day he had to go on a trip, and he couldn't take the cat with him. So he left it with his brother to watch. Well, the next day he called home and asked his brother, "How's my cat doing?" His brother said, "I'm sorry, your cat died." And of course the man was very upset about this, very unhappy. He's grieving. He said, the worst thing is you didn't prepare me for it all. You had said that. And his brother said, "Well, what should I have said?" And the man said, "Well, you could have said, the cat's up on the roof and we can't get it down." And then I'd call back the next day and you'd say, "Well, the cat fell off the roof and it's not doing very well. We're not sure how it's going to go." And then I'd call the third day and you could say, "Well, the cat died." And then I'd be prepared for it. And his brother said, "Okay, I've got it. I understand." The man said, "All right, well, how's everything? How's Mom doing?" "Well, she's up on the roof and we can't get her down." So if my mom can laugh about a joke about a mom dying, I know that you're perfectly welcome to laugh at what I'm about to say. And I also have to say, even though she would never admit it, I know my mom is getting a kick out of being the center of attention right now. Don't deny it. My mom was only 76 years old, very, very sad. But she, you should know, she had had a very full and happy and fulfilled life. I don't think she had any regrets. She had a wonderful life. She'd be the first to say that. And she'd also been very healthy in her life. So at this point, I'm living in Utah, and I got a call from my brother Steve saying that Mom had been checked into the hospital for tests. Well, I didn't think anything of it. People go into the hospital all the time, but I sent flowers. So Steve was there at her hospital room when the flowers arrived with Mom. It was quiet. I thought she was dozing in the bed. And it was one of those things. It was roses that came in a box with a vase and a packet of chemicals, and you assemble the whole arrangement yourself. And so Steve decided to do that, and he's getting it, and it has instructions on how to do this. And he's reading the instructions, and one of them says, "Remove outer petals." And he's looking at the roses, and he said to himself, but out loud, "Which ones are the outer petals?" And from behind him, my mother, from what literally became her deathbed, said, "Do you see the inner petals?" "Yes." "The outer petals are the other ones." It's a typical sardonic crack from Texas Driggs. As I said, my mom had been a lifelong smoker, and for years and years, my brothers and our families and I had been telling Mom, "Stop smoking, quit smoking, it's terrible, it's going to kill you." And Mom just ignored it, waved it off, poo-pooed it. She was going to be fine. Well, my brother's family was gathered around her bed when the doctor came and gave her the diagnosis. She had cancer, and it was very advanced, and she didn't have much left to live. And Mom said to the doctor, "Was it the cigarettes?" And the doctor said, "No, actually, this kind of cancer is not caused by smoking." And my mom said, "Ha! I told you!" Only my mother could gloat over dying differently than people predicted she would. So, of course, when I got this news, we hopped on a plane and flew out there. But I got there toward the end, and she was not doing well. At that point, I was able to say, "I love you." Goodbye, but I talked with her, but she wasn't. She was in great pain. She was on medication. My brothers had been with her all week. They had been able to have lovely final conversations with her, do things for her. My brother Dan is a contractor. He was at her home at that point doing some remodeling, so in case we were able to take her home for hospice, she would be more comfortable. But I was there, and there was nothing. nothing I could do. I felt helpless. So I said to, Mom, can I get you some water? How about your pillows? Can I adjust them, fluff them? No. How about your bed? Would you like me to raise it or lower it? Or something? The final words my blessed mother said to me in this life were, "Just leave me alone." Now live with that memory without going into therapy or using it at a storytelling concert. As we began getting ready for the final funeral arrangements and all that, I said to my brothers, "Now we're going to cremate her, right? That's what she wanted, wasn't it?" I wasn't sure. I wanted them to confirm that. And they said, "I don't know. I think she talked about it some, but did she? We weren't quite sure." But just around that time, we're going through papers. We found a file. We found a piece of paper in which she had written information for her obituary and instructions for her funeral. And because of what was actually on that paper, I know she had kept this piece of paper for 50 years. She had been working on this. And there, so on it, like it said, had her name, her birth date, her parents' names, her kids' names, all that. And then it said which Episcopal funeral service she wanted, their options, and which readings from the Bible she wanted read at her funeral. And there, clearly in her handwriting in the margin, was written the word cremation. Question mark. Thanks a lot, Mom. Well, we decided that we were going to be a little bit unconventional, and we did cremate her, and we decided that the small family that had gathered together, including some relatives from out of town, my mom's brother from Maine, her niece and nephew from St. Louis had flown in, that we were going to take her ashes to the cemetery and bury them next to my father, who had not been cremated, by the way, and then we would go to the church for the funeral. And of course, most of the people were from out of town and didn't know their way through Sweet Home. And so we come out of the house that morning and okay, you're riding with them and you're going to follow that. What car are you in? And getting all the arrangements, all the folderol and getting that ready. And so everyone's in the cars except Steve and I. And we're the last ones to get in. And just as he's stepping into his car, Steve said, "Wait, who has mother?" We were going to bury her ashes, and we had left them in the house. Well, we did get the ashes. We did bury her. We made it to the church. And I don't think it would be a surprise to any of you that as the family raconteur, I was the one elected to give the stories and tell the eulogy, tell my mom's story, told stories about her, none of the ones I'm sharing tonight. It was a great hit. Everybody loved it. But Steve said that before I spoke, he wanted to say just one little thing. And he said there'd be 2 short sentences, and he said it's going to be so fast. He said, as soon as I start talking, I want you to stand up and start walking up the aisle, because I'll finish and I'll come down the aisle, and as I pass you, I want you to raise your hand so I can give you a high five as we pass. A little weird, but he's the big brother, he's in charge. Okay, that's what we'll do. And that's what we did. So what were the 2 little sentences that my mother's oldest son said at her funeral? I met Texas when she was 19 years old. She was fabulous. And he's right, she was. Thank you all very much for coming.
Thank you so much. Just fantastic. All those amazing stories. And I feel like I've gotten to know you better, even though, we've known each other for a few years. But now I feel like, maybe I have some tales from Sweet Home. Maybe that's what the rest of you have kind of felt in your hearts as well. I think it's amazing when we hear these stories. And even if it didn't happen to us, we said they're reminded about our own families, our own experiences, no matter what has happened to us, the different backgrounds. Just thank you for giving that to us. So let's give a nice round of applause to Jeff Driggs. What's really special too about tonight is that he's told stories all over the place, but you got this full hour time. I mean, usually he has to share it with these other storytellers because they're all trying to get the spotlight as well. And today we were able to then have him. And you know what? I think we're going to have definitely more house concerts, and we're just going to have you keep, building your repertoire and keep going on and on. Because if you don't know this about Jeff, he has done so many plays, so much theater, and so storytelling is another art form that he has explored. And I'm so glad. Now I'm just curious. Okay, I'm going to do that. Okay, so you've been in theater so long. What got you to storytelling again?
I went to the Timpanogos Storytelling
So
Festival.
the Timpanogos Storytelling Festival.
And I heard
See,
some
thank
wonderful
you.
personal stories. I've
Yeah.
done stories like
See?
that.
So right now, you're listening right now. This could be you later, right? As you're inspired and you do that. And that's what I love about these storytelling festivals or events and things that you go to is you can suddenly be inspired, and even if it's not on a big stage like Timpanogos, but if you tell them in your home, I've always believed the most important stage anywhere is in your own home. So please, please, everyone, take that with you. And with that said, again, please join us for other adventures for us. And one thing in particular that I want you to be aware of is that you someday could be up here yourself. So please reach out to us. We are very much about arts education. And that's what we do year-round. We don't just have our big summit and festival, which is happening, which, by the way, I know you want on your calendars. It's May 5th through 8th, 2025. And just last night, the registration is up. You can already be planning. I know. See, I can see those. See, I have just so the live streamers know, she's going like this. Yes, you put it on your calendars. It'll be exciting. We are hybrid. So those who are streaming, guess what? If you don't come out here to Utah, although you're very welcome to come, but if you don't make it out here to Salt Lake County, then we film everything and you can enjoy it all. But there is the perks of in-person. So like, for example, the house concert, the people here are going to be getting refreshments. And for those who are live streaming, which we have quite a few live streaming, so yay, hurrah to you. You're shy though. I mean, I know how many are out there watching, and yet I have one person who said thank you. Really? Okay. All right. So kudos to Deborah, who I know you know. Yeah, which is really exciting.
She grew up in Sweet Home.
Yeah, and because Deborah grew up in Sweet Home, which is really great. So if any of those who I know are watching, you can throw in your thank yous or an applause. But if not, I know you're there, and you're probably going to send some nice messages to him later. So that's good. And you can also donate at storycrossroads.org/donate. And the live streamers, you have that link, but you also have the QR code there. And remember, Friday, November 15th, we kick off our year-end campaign. I'm actually really excited because we've been doing this for 10 years, and we're finally actually going to mail and do this thing. So our goal, and this is like the minimum goal, and I think we can easily do this. Our goal is to raise $2,025 because next year is 2025. But I'm also thinking that's the minimum. I believe in all of you. I think we could get even more. I bet it could be even more. But our minimum goal for this big kickoff is 2025 because in honor of that 10th year, our 10th Summit and Festival, and enjoying more and more. Oh, and I keep thinking, you want more because it's year-round. The next house concert, so whether you're in person or live streaming, will be a Monday night, December 16th. It's going to be in Murray, so still Salt Lake County. And what's nice is that it will be Yuletide Tales of Christmas. And so Janine Evans is going to be telling specifically European stories. And that was requested by the host out there in Murray. So we're grateful and excited about that. And then if you want to put another one on your calendar, January 10th, of 2025, we will have Randall McGee, and he will be telling stories as Hans Christian Andersen, including his paper cutting. If you didn't know that talent that Hans Christian Andersen has, or had, Randall McGee does that as well. And that's going to be in Orem. So we jump around, and so in Orem, that will take place whether you come in person or you live stream. So for the live streamers, I'm going to pop up a little thing so you can see about Janine at least, and check that out. And I'm going to make sure that these people here get some like strawberries and grapes and cookies and things. But you, streaming, you have permission, not that you need it from me, you have permission to go to your fridge or freezer and get a treat. Okay? But not until you see the little thing I'm going to pop up. Okay? About
Where's the pop-up?
and pop, now it's there. See, you can plan and plan. All right, thank you everybody. Yay, let's go. And onward to the treats.
Thanks, Rachel.
We have more. What was his wife I knew Estelle in church there. This is not the bell I knew. I can't even remember what it is, but I know it was. I didn't know her husband.
Well, I don't know what his parents were, because they lived and died in Sweden, so the grandparents.
But you think that was the mother's parents?
Yeah, I don't think I was Jason's parents. I should ask.
How old was he?
Oh, is Jason right now? He's
No.
40.
So water.
Oh, well, he has,
One apple here too, and then we have cookies and 2 different grapes, because she's just doing 2 different flavors of grapes. And then strawberries and thank you.
He grew up in Albany. Like right
All these very close, yeah.
So I,
Sweet Home to Lebanon to Albany.
I love your mom's amazing. That's just cool, right?
Yeah. She appreciated the uniqueness of it, but she hated the strangers coming. I'll tell you your story. Hey, I knew a woman named Kentucky.
I have a cousin named September. I said, that's
You
great.
would have said that, she would have.
But she wasn't born in September.
I have to tell you, so what is the age difference between you and your brothers?
9 and 10 years.
I have,
I was going to say between my parents, because there was a difference between them. Well,
I have 2 younger brothers, and one's 10 years younger and one's 14 years younger. So.
is that it? Just the 3 of you?
I had an older sister. She was 13 months older than me. So she passed away when I was 36.
Oh, when you're 36. So you grew up with her.
Yes.
See, I always say I grew up as an only child. My brothers never moved to Sweet Home. They were gone by the time I was 8 years old.
Sunset Florida.
Well, they stayed. We moved.
Oh, okay.